Okay, guys, the next book is called Amelia and Eleanor Go for a Ride. And this is by Pam Munoz Ryan, and the pictures are by Brian Selznick. And this is a true story about Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt. And I'll read you a little bit about them from the back of the book after the story. Let's see. It's called Amelia and Eleanor Go for a Ride. You guys can see that, okay. Amelia and Eleanor were birds of a feather. Eleanor was outspoken and determined. So was Amelia. Amelia was daring and liked to try things other women wouldn't even consider. Eleanor was the very same. So when Eleanor discovered that her friend Amelia was coming to town to give a speech, she naturally said, "Bring your husband and come to dinner at my house. You can even sleep over." It wasn't unusual for two friends to get together, but Eleanor was Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States, who lived in the White House with her husband, President Franklin Roosevelt. Amelia was Amelia Earhart, the celebrated aviator who'd been the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. And when two of the most famous and adventurous women in the world got together, something exciting was bound to happen. Washington, D.C. There's the White House. These are all cherry blossoms that come out in the spring. In a guest room at the White House, Amelia and her husband, G.P., dressed for dinner. Amelia pulled on the long white evening gloves that were so different from the ones she wore when she was flying. Many people didn't understand why a woman would want to risk her life in a plane, but Amelia had said it more than once. It's for the fun of it. Besides, she loved the feeling of independence she had when she was in the cockpit. She carefully folded a gift for Eleanor, a silk scarf that matched her own. The powder blue with streaks of indigo reminded Amelia of morning sky. Meanwhile, Eleanor dressed for dinner too. Her brother, Hall, would be escorting her this evening because the president had a meeting to attend, but Eleanor was used to that. She pulled on the long white evening gloves that were so different from the ones that she sometimes wore while driving. Then she peeked out the window at the brand new car that had just been delivered that afternoon. She couldn't wait to drive it. Many people thought it was too bold and dangerous for a woman to drive a car, especially the First Lady of the United States. But Eleanor always gave the same answer. It's practical, that's all. Besides, she loved the feeling of independence she had when she was behind the wheel. Just like when Amelia flies, right? It was a brisk and cloudless April evening. The guests had gathered in the Red Room, and the table looked elegant as even small dinner parties at the White House can be. Eleanor and Hall greeted Amelia and G.P., as well as several reporters and photographers. Amelia gave Eleanor the scarf. "I love it," Eleanor exclaimed. "It's just like yours." Dinner started with George Washington's crab chowder. "This is delicious," said Amelia. "But if soup at the White House has such a fancy name, what will dessert be called? Perhaps Abraham Lincoln's peach cobbler, or maybe Thomas Jefferson's custard?" They laughed as everyone took turns guessing. By the time they got to the roast duck, the conversation had turned to flying. "Mrs. Roosevelt just received her student pilot's license," said one of the reporters. Amelia wasn't surprised. She had been the one to encourage Eleanor. She knew her friend could do anything she set her mind to. "I'll teach you myself," offered Amelia. "I accept." "Tell us, Amelia, what's it like to fly at night in the dark?" Everyone at the table leaned closer to hear. Very few people in the whole world had ever flown at night, and Amelia was one of them. Amelia's eyes sparkled. The stars glitter all about and seem close enough to touch. At higher elevations, the clouds below shine white with dark islands where the night sea shows through. I've seen the planet Venus setting on the horizon, and I've circled cities of twinkling lights. "And the capital city at night?" asked Eleanor. "There's no describing it," said Amelia. "You just have to experience it on a clear night when you can see forever. Why, we should go tonight. We could fly the loop to Baltimore and back in no time." The Secret Serviceman protested. "This hasn't been approved." "Nonsense," said Eleanor. "If Amelia Earhart can fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, I can certainly take a short flight to Baltimore and back." Before dessert could be served, Amelia had called Eastern Air Transport and arranged a flight. There they are on the plane. Within the hour, Amelia and Eleanor boarded the Curtiss Condor twin-motor airplane. For a moment, both women looked up at the mysterious night sky. Then, without changing her gloves, Amelia slipped into the cockpit and took the wheel. The plane rolled down the runway faster and faster. Lights from the airstrip flashed in front of them, and they lifted into the dark. How amusing it is to see a girl in a white evening dress and high-heeled shoes flying a plane, Eleanor said. Amelia laughed as she made a wide sweep over Washington, D.C. and turned off all the lights in the plane. Out the window, the Potomac River glistened with moonshine. The Capitol dome reflected a soft golden halo, and the enormous, light-drenched monuments looked like tiny miniatures. Soon the peaceful countryside gave way to shadowy woodlands. The Chesapeake Bay became a meandering outline on the horizon, and even though they knew it wasn't so, it seemed as if the plane crawled slowly through the star-struck space. Eleanor marveled. It's like sitting on top of the world. Oh, look at that. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. It's kind of sunny in here today, so the pictures are not showing up great. Oh, let's use paper in here. Sorry about that. When it was time to land, Amelia carefully took the plane down. A group of reporters had gathered, anxious to ask questions. Mrs. Roosevelt, did you feel safe knowing a girl was flying that ship? Of course she did. Just as safe, said Eleanor. Did you fly the plane, Mrs. Roosevelt? Asked one reporter. What part did you like the best? Said another. I enjoyed it so much, and no, I didn't actually fly the plane, not yet, but someday I intend to. I was thrilled by the city lights and the brilliance of the blinking pinpoints below. Amelia smiled. She knew just how Eleanor felt. I think I missed a page. I did. As the Secret Service agents drove them slowly back to the White House, Amelia and Eleanor agreed that there was nothing quite as exciting as flying. What could compare? Well, they admitted maybe the closest thing would be driving in a fast car on a straightaway road with a stiff breeze blowing against your face. Arms linked, they walked up the steps to the White House. Eleanor whispered something to Amelia, and then they hesitated, letting the rest of the group walk ahead of them. Are you coming inside, Mrs. Roosevelt? Someone asked. But by then they had wrapped their silk scarves around their neck and were hurrying toward Eleanor's new car. Those two are rebels. Without changing her gloves, Eleanor quickly slipped into the driver's seat and took her turn at the wheel. With the wind in their hair and the brisk air stinging their cheeks, they flew down the road. And after they had taken a ride about the city streets of Washington, D.C., they finally headed back to the White House. For dessert, Eleanor Roosevelt's pink clouds on angel food cake. The end. Oh, here's a recipe for her pink clouds on angel food cake. So back here it says Amelia and Eleanor. Just mentioning their names brings choruses. They're my heroes, or I've always loved and admired them. So when I found an obscure reference to their night flight, I couldn't wait to write a story about it, if only it were true. I sat in the library and scanned rolls and rolls of newspaper film and finally found the Associated Press articles. Later, Brian Selznick found a photograph from that very evening. The incident really happened. In 1932, Amelia Earhart did what was then considered unthinkable. She flew solo across the Atlantic Ocean to demonstrate that women like to do such things and can. The world reacted with unbridled excitement. In addition to Amelia's flying achievements, she made her mark in other ways. In the 1930s, she disapproved of the special minimum wage law for women, which was lower than that for men, and she fought for equal rights for men and women. After her famous flight, she was invited to speak at many functions where she discussed her political views as well as her experiences flying. In 1932, Eleanor Roosevelt was asked to introduce Amelia at one of these speeches. That's how they met. Eleanor Roosevelt moved into the White House in 1933 during the Great Depression. She transformed the role of First Lady by becoming a commanding role model. When the country went on food rationing, she insisted that the White House do the same. When cars became increasingly popular, she drove one, despite criticism. When she saw inequality, she became an activist for women's and human rights. Her practical approach to issues gained her enormous respect. Many people have said she was a woman ahead of her time. She would have said it was just common sense. And the rest of it just talks about the story here. And then it says Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt were remarkable women who mesmerized the public with their lives. Sadly, in 1937, in an attempt to be the first woman to fly around the world, Amelia and her plane mysteriously vanished somewhere over the South Pacific. She was never heard from again. In 1938, a year after Amelia Earhart's tragic disappearance, her husband G.P. found Eleanor Roosevelt's student pilot's license among Amelia's papers. He wrote to Mrs. Roosevelt and enclosed the license as a memento of the time when Eleanor Roosevelt almost became Amelia Earhart's star pupil. I hope you guys like that book. That's an amazing story. See you soon.